Thanks for listening to the GOSH podcast, the Gynecologic Oncology Sharing Hub. We share real, evidence-based discussions on gynecologic cancers featuring stories from patients, survivors, researchers, and clinicians. Our podcast is produced and recorded on traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It is produced by the Gynecologic Cancer Initiative, a BC-wide effort to advance research and care for gynecologic cancers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabrina, and I'm the new co-host for the GOSH podcast. Today, I'm joined by Sharon Grover, who is a BRCA2 carrier and what is known as a gynecologic cancer previvor. She also happens to be my lovely mother. Now, a previvor is a little bit different from a survivor. While a survivor is someone who's been diagnosed and treated for cancer, a previvor is someone who hasn't had cancer, but carries a high risk of getting cancer because of an inherited gene that runs in their family. In Sharon's case, that's a BRCA2 mutation, which can significantly increase one's risk of breast and ovarian cancer. I'm very excited to be chatting with Sharon today. Sharon is a mom, a teacher, and an amateur mountain biker. When she's not busy with all of that, you'll probably find her playing pickleball, lacing up for a hockey game, or curled up on the couch with a book and her 2 labradoodles. Sharon is here to share her experience as a BRCA2 carrier and talk about the steps she has taken to reduce her risk of breast and ovarian cancer. Welcome, Sharon. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So I was thinking we could start way back at the beginning of your journey with all of this. I was wondering if you could tell me what initially prompted you to get genetic testing.
Sure. So my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer when she was 51. And her diagnosis came after a car accident and some symptoms which weren't, they couldn't figure out what was going on. So it was a very late diagnosis. She wasn't ill at all, but they found quite a big tumor, and she lived and fought against ovarian cancer for 11 years. So she had various rounds of chemotherapy and surgeries, and one of the doctors she worked with out of Montreal offered her the option of genetic testing, not for her particularly, but for myself and my 3 siblings. So she had genetic testing done and discovered that she was a BRCA2 carrier, which meant that all her children had a 50% chance of inheriting the mutation. And I was given the option there to have genetic testing done because I was so closely related to a carrier.
Right.
So that's where we got started.
Right. And before your mother was diagnosed, had you ever heard of this BRCA gene or had any idea of what it would mean for you in your future?
Absolutely none.
I don't think that's surprising. I think there's been a lot of movement to increase awareness around BRCA and ovarian cancer risk in general, but it certainly wasn't the priority back then.
I think that's true.
So we currently know that the model we have of genetic testing can be quite exclusive. So not everyone who necessarily wants genetic testing has access to it. And the researchers that work at the GCI are really trying to improve that. Can you tell us about your experience with genetic testing? Did you get it through the publicly funded province, I guess, or did you have private testing?
Well, it started with a visit to my family doctor in Ontario, so OHIP covered, and she referred me to genetic testing at Queen's University. So I went that way, and it was totally public, so there's nothing private about it. And that's how we proceeded through the cancer center at the Kingston General Hospital.
Right. I think it makes sense that since you're directly related to someone they already knew was a BRCA carrier, they would have been putting you through the public system quite quickly. So that
Yeah.
makes lots of sense.
Yeah.
So let's go to the day that you actually received your results after getting your genetic testing. What was your immediate reaction to finding out that you were also a BRCA carrier?
I guess I was fairly shocked, actually. For some reason, I didn't think I would be a carrier. I think that optimism, but it was shock and then sadness because, as you know, the risks associated with it are pretty significant, and the I guess the things you can do about it are limited in scope in terms of, well, I mean, you can monitor, which tells you if and when you get cancer, but there's not much you can do to prevent it. That's not, or in my case anyway, that's not pretty significant. So I was pretty sad to learn.
Yeah, I can imagine that that's
Mm.
quite big news, especially that you didn't grow up knowing that this might be something that would happen, and it's just sort of immediate after you've been through so much with your mother and her whole cancer journey. And I imagine having seen that and had firsthand experience, it was probably hard to then know that there was a chance, at least, that that could be in your future.
Yeah, that's right.
Thankfully, we have now, since you knew you were a carrier, you had access to preventative options, but it certainly could be scary. Did you prepare yourself for the possibility that you might have a positive result, or were you just going in kind of blinded?
No, well, I knew that I had a 50% chance of being positive. So, um, it was, I was very well aware of my risk level. Um, but I don't know how you actually prepare for that kind of news because until you have the information, there's not much to be done. And so I waited until I had the information and then proceeded from there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Is there anything that particularly stood out as being challenging in terms of receiving your results? And there was anything that like helped you navigate all those feelings that came after receiving your negative result or positive result?
Well, I don't know if this is answering exactly that question, but what I didn't have, what wasn't really available at the time was much of a support network of and information about people who had been through this particular procedure because it was almost 20 years ago. And when I went looking for information from other people and how they had experienced it and the um, ideas for how to deal with it and where to go to support and things to think about it wasn't there, or I couldn't find it anyway. There was the medical research you could find, so I could learn about the statistics and the medical options, but I didn't have the personal information of survivors.
Yeah, I can imagine that's like very must feel very lonely in your diagnosis when you don't have access to people who have been through it or who might be able to help. Even just outside of the medical stuff itself, I feel like there's so many factors that it'd be nice to have someone to chat with. And I think nowadays that's a lot more available, but I can imagine it must have been difficult for you.
Yeah, in fact, I read I wrote an editorial, I guess it's called, like a short essay for and submitted it to the Globe and Mail about my experience. So it was really short, but it was because I hadn't had anybody, I hadn't heard stories. I thought I would share mine, and I actually had a couple people contact me, or they found ways to contact me to reach out to talk about it because they didn't have anybody either to talk with. And I thought that was pretty telling that they were willing to talk to a complete stranger because it was somebody who had been through what was looming for them. So yeah, it was. I don't think I thought of it at the time as lonely, but just it was just too bad that I didn't have some other ideas.
Yeah, I actually recently read your Globe and Mail article that you wrote, and it's beautiful. I would like to say you very well written.
Thank
It
you.
was a fun and touching read. So after you had your positive result, the next steps generally for people are to start thinking about what they're going to do with that information. So what kinds of conversations were you having with your healthcare providers around what your options were?
So I think I went mostly, I think the genetic counselor helped a little bit, but I mostly went back to my own family physician and looked at options. And there are like ongoing testing that can be done. And I was already in a high risk testing program for both ovarian and breast cancer. So that was sort of ongoing already. But I had recently had a false positive on a mammogram. Um, and that sort of made me think a lot about living for the next, decades, hopefully, with this constant fear that my odds of getting breast cancer were actually quite high. And just having had that positive, or that it was a false positive, but um, that one particular piece of information made me seriously not decide I didn't want to live that way with this constant threat. So I knew the options in terms of um, there were some drug options which would have mitigated the risk slightly, um, or just testing, which would tell you if and when you developed any kind of cancer, or there was the option to have surgeries to virtually eliminate the risk of cancer. So I forgot what your question was, but remind me what the question was.
I was just asking what the conversations you had with your healthcare providers were
Oh,
like.
yeah. So it was about the pros and cons of all these options, I guess, and learning about what the actual options were. So and it was always presented to me quite well in terms of here's the options, and I felt like I would be well supported regardless of which options I chose. It was very non-biased information, I thought. Um, yeah.
Were there any lifestyle or personal factors unique to you that you found to be particularly important when you were deciding whether or not to have maybe these invasive surgical options versus less invasive, for example, using those chemo preventions or medications like you mentioned?
Yeah. I had finished having kids, so I knew that like, I didn't want more kids, so I didn't need, or I didn't need my ovaries anymore, and I wasn't going to breastfeed again. Um, so that was important, like my stage of life. And then I also have um, a good job where I had the opportunity to take sick leave um, and still have an income, and that matters a lot because these are big surgeries, and if I didn't have an income, it wouldn't have been an option, or if I didn't have a means to be financially sustained. And then I also have a huge community of supporters who um, I knew would be helpful, or would help me along. So without those things, I don't think some of the choices would be feasible.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it certainly takes a village when it comes to the recovery time from some of these surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of the surgery and or the surgeries, in the end, you ended up having both a double mastectomy and a sapingo-oophorectomy and hysterectomy, which would be the removal of your uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries, and then also the removal of your breasts. Very invasive surgeries, you could say, but also the most protective when it comes to prevention. So that's very brave of you. Can you walk us through what it was like leading up to those surgeries and what kinds of planning you had to do in terms of work, home life, family, and how you're feeling leading up to those?
Yeah, so I decided to have the hysterectomy first because I could do it laparoscopically, and so it was a less invasive and kind of easier surgery. And so, so that was planned to do in my hometown of Kingston. Um, and the mastectomy surgery, I opted to do the mastectomy and reconstructive surgery all in one. And that wasn't possible to do in Kingston at the time. And I think things have changed, but when I had it done, I had to go to Ottawa to do it. So there were lots of logistical things. And first of all, I had to arrange it with the doctors, obviously, but then I had to arrange both my life and my work life to make sure everything could continue. So my employer was fantastic, actually, and just said, do what you need to do, and let us know. So they were really good. It meant prepping to leave my work for months. And then I had to figure out, because at the time my kids were little, and um, so had to figure care out. And my husband was and is still amazing and supportive. And my brother happened to be living with us at the time. So having him around was also really helpful. Um, so for the first surgery was kind of, it's not minor surgery, but I was in the hospital for just a few days and then home again, and not particularly useful at home, but present. And we had a community of friends who brought meals every night to us. And that went reasonably smoothly. Well, it went very smoothly, actually. And I recovered fairly well, quickly from that one. And then the second one was much a bigger surgery. And I had a friend in Ottawa who I lived with for the first week after coming out of hospital. So that was a post mastectomy and reconstructive surgery. And I had a friend in Kingston who offered to take our three kids she took a week off work and took care of our kids for a week, and they were little. So that was a huge, amazing support that she provided. And then I had some, I can't remember what you call it, but when things go bad after surgery.
Complications.
Yes, I had some complications. So I had to be returned to the hospital. And at that point, I moved into my sister's house, who happens to live in Ottawa, and opened up her home to us. And my kids and my husband came to Ottawa at that point for a while, and we all stayed there. So that was a bit rough, to
Yeah.
say the least. And I don't know the technology currently because I don't really follow it, but at the time, I had to return to the hospital post surgically. I think it was once every 2 weeks. And once I had moved out of Ottawa and back home, that meant a return trip regularly. And it's a pretty painful surgery. So there's lots of people outside of the health profession who stepped up and supported us. And without that, I don't know how somebody could do it.
Yeah, it really takes a village when you're going through these surgeries that have potential complications. I think certainly it's been 20 years since then. So I think there's been some surgical advances, and we can hope that maybe it's a little bit easier for people nowadays considering mastectomy as an option. But even after all of those complications and all those decisions, are you still happy with your decision to have had your preventative surgeries?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was never a time that I questioned my decision, even when it was hard, because it meant that I was giving myself the best chance of evading or avoiding cancer, given that I had a really high risk of one or the other. So I never doubted the choice to go ahead.
Yeah, I think that makes tons of sense. I think when comparing how difficult what you went through to how difficult the process my grandmother, your mother, went through 11 years of fighting cancer, I think it certainly puts everything into perspective a little bit more. Not to like minimize everything you went through, which was also very difficult, but I think that it's made you stronger to have seen and have lived through all of that to know it was worth it.
No, absolutely. I was lucky to have the options that I had.
Yeah, and I can speak as the child of someone who went through this. I remember having an awesome week-long sleepover with my best friend, and that was lovely for me. And I remember my mom coming home with her new water balloon boobs as she described it to me. So that
Yeah,
was all
there were some
fine and
perks.
good. Okay, so when you reflect on this whole journey, do you think that having this mutation has like impacted your identity or any of your relationships in your life since you've now known?
Well, I'm sure it's impacted my identity because it's part of my life story, my experience. But I don't think it's changed how I feel about myself. I know that I was offered um, like therapy services, I guess, support, because some people struggle with their notions of femininity, and that wasn't something I felt I needed. That, um, yeah, that wasn't an issue for me. But I think everything, in your life journey, these challenges all shape who you are. And I would suggest in my circumstances, it really um, strengthened a lot of my relationships with people because, they were there for me.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. And I also think you really have quite a determined and persevere or you're quite don't know how to say that, but
Persistent?
you're thank you. You're a very persistent and determined person, which I think certainly helps when you're faced with such a life challenge or something that could be scary. I would say instead of cowering in fear, you really faced it head on and were quite an example for me and my siblings as we might have to face this journey ourselves. So good work with that. And when you think about your mother's experience compared to your own, what does it mean to you to have had this information that you're a carrier and have had access to these potentially life-saving preventative procedures?
Well, I'm really grateful to her that she took the opportunity to get genetic testing done when it was offered to her, because I don't think when she was offered it, she really even knew what it meant. And she took the time to figure out and to listen to, because it had no bearing on her own wellness. Like, it was too late for her, but she did it for our sake. So I'm really thankful that she was open to the idea of this new technology and pursuing it and giving us this the chance to have the information to make choices, because otherwise we would have just been completely ignorant.
Yeah, she was very ahead of her time in
Yeah,
many
absolutely.
ways.
Yeah, she really was. And thankful to the people in Montreal who set it up and allowed her to do it.
Yeah, I mean, in my own research, I recently learned that only like 10% of people, at least in BC, who had ovarian cancer like she did, were even offered or got genetic testing back in 2002 when she would have had her testing. So she was lucky to have even been offered and then also brave enough to have gone through with it, and how that has impacted your life and will impact all of the future generations is huge.
yeah, it was a really important step for her to take and to sort of embrace it and say yes, because it has a huge impact on us, like her four
Absolutely.
kids and all the grandkids.
And so when you think about these future generations of potentially previvors, what do you hope will improve or what do you hope will change?
Well, I think it's happening, and I hope it continues that people are are supported and offered the option to get genetic testing done. And I hope we learn um, more about how cancer is passed along, and so the tests can be refined, so they can be more accurate. And then I hope we get better ways to deal and with people who are at very high risk. Because the surgeries I went through, like I'm fine now, um, but it would be nice if it didn't have to be so invasive. If there were other options to minimize risk, but without um, without being so hard. So I
Yeah,
wish
yeah.
that everybody who had a significant risk knew about it, was allowed to be tested for it, and then had better options to um, support and avoid cancer.
Yeah, that is true. And I think that there are big strides being made to hopefully make those changes by the time next generation gets around to considering their preventative options.
Yeah, well, I think it's people like you who are doing this research and making it accessible to people. It's really important because there are people who don't know anything about this, and why would they? And it can be really scary. And we need people to understand that there are options, and there are things to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look back at all of this, everything you've been through, what's one piece of advice that you wish you had received before or
Mm.
along the journey that you might be able to offer to our listeners?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I would want people to know that they're not alone. That I mean, this um, diagnosis of being a possessor of a mutation is scary, but it's having the information is so powerful, because that knowledge allows you to move and make choices that are well informed. So I hope that people don't not get tested because they're scared of the results. Because for me have to know what I was fighting against was really important, and to know that there are supports once, if you are unfortunate and are a carrier, it's not the end of the world. Hopefully, now, there are really good options that you can take, or yeah, you can take, or you can choose not to, but at least you know what you're up against, and so you might make decisions sort of accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think anyone considering getting genetic testing can really benefit from that strong statement that it's not the end of the world and you can feel empowered by the information, not just scared by it. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us and being vulnerable, sharing your story. I think there's so many people that will benefit from this conversation, just like they benefited from your article you wrote back in the day. And now that more conversations are happening around this topic, I think it'll have a much bigger reach and people will hopefully feel not alone in their genetic testing results or whether considering getting genetic testing. So thank you so much for sitting down.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for doing the research and for making the information more accessible to people.
To wrap up today's impactful episode, I'm joined by Katrina Remacher Eddy, the co-founder and managing director of BRCA in BC. BRCA in BC is a knowledge mobilization organization helping to close the information and support gap for individuals at high risk of hereditary cancer in British Columbia. As Sharon shared in today's episode, going through genetic testing and making decisions about prevention can feel lonely, especially when you don't know anyone who's facing the same struggles. Today, Katrina is here to talk about BRCA in BC and how they support carriers and those considering undergoing genetic testing. Welcome, Katrina. Would you mind telling us a bit more about BRCA in BC and the organization's mission?
Sure. Well, you've mentioned kind of our main tagline there, but primarily BRCA in BC or BRCA in BC is a nonprofit here in British Columbia that is dedicated to supporting people at increased risk of hereditary cancers, especially those linked to the BRCA mutations. And our mission is to close that information and support gap that families at high risk of cancer often face. We raise awareness, connect people with accessible information about genetic testing and preventative cancer care, and we build supportive communities. So our big pie in the sky vision is to help cut deaths from BRCA-driven cancers in half over the next 25 years.
Big goal, but very important step. So can you tell me a bit about what kind of support you offer to someone who might be considering genetic testing?
Yeah, we primarily help people understanding their options for genetic testing. That includes giving a clear overview of the BC Cancer Hereditary Cancer Program that's available, which now has a better website than it once did, but can still be a little bit confusing and unclear for people who are unfamiliar with it. So we try to really get that information out there and make it really clear and accessible. But importantly, for people who don't qualify for publicly funded testing, we also provide clear information about private self-paid testing with descriptions of lab options available for Canadians and up-to-date information about the benefits and drawbacks of each option that folks might need to consider when they're choosing a test. Some other gaps we try to address are in the affordability of testing. So, access is really a key value for us. And so we offer a bursary program for people to help cover the cost of testing if they couldn't afford it and they didn't qualify for public testing. We also share simple, easy to understand educational resources so people understand what testing involves, what genetic counseling involves, what it might mean for them and their family, and how to prepare for the genetic counseling appointment or even create a family history. And then just right now, connected with testing, we are currently partnered with BC Cancer to offer a special program called the Jewish BRCA testing pilot program, which is a 3-year pilot right now providing an opportunity for free BRCA testing for any adult in BC and Yukon with at least one Jewish grandparent. And that is on until March 31st, 2026.
Wow, so many great resources that anyone listening who's considering getting genetic testing, especially for a BRCA mutation, can consider looking into. Could you tell us a bit more about the support that you offer to carriers or people with a positive genetic testing result?
Yeah, a positive result can obviously be and understandably be quite emotional and feel very overwhelming, especially at first. So support is really important. So through the provincial program, people are, of course, connected with the high risk clinic here in BC, which supports them in accessing their high risk screening and connecting them with, say, preventative surgical options if that's something they're interested in. We are more focused on ensuring carriers have their informational, social, and psychological needs met during these sensitive times and thereafter. So to meet those needs, we currently offer carriers monthly virtual psychoeducational sessions on topics of concern to them, like breast reconstruction options, new research in cancer prevention, family planning, fertility issues, or even just managing anxiety, scanxiety. I can't even say it. But there's scanxiety is one of those things. So whenever you're getting your tests back, your every 6-month scans, things like that carriers deal with on a pretty regular basis. So these are opportunities to be in a safe online space with other carriers and our local experts. We learn together and ask questions that really matter the most to our carriers. And we find that people really find this support makes them feel a lot less alone in their experience as a carrier. So it's a really valuable resource we've found. We're also really excited that we have a new initiative launching this fall, which is a Learn to Run group. And it's combined with a walk and roll group in the lead up to CIBC's Run for the Cure. And so this is a little pilot project we'll be offering weekly on Tuesday evenings for the next 5 weeks. And everyone will be given the opportunity to learn how to run a 5K or walk together, and then they can join in on the team on October 5th. And so we hope this will further support carriers to connect with one another, learn a new skill, connect with their bodies, and just have some fun together.
Wow, again, so many great resources that anyone who's a carrier can learn from or enjoy. Can you tell us more about where people can find more information about BRCA in BC in general?
Yeah, the best place to start is, of course, our website. So it's brcanbc.ca. There you'll find information on testing options, support, educational resources. We also have a partner site, so BRCA support. bc.org, where you can find more information on the upcoming educational sessions or watch past recordings of previous sessions. And of course, the BC Cancer Hereditary Cancer Program is another excellent resource for anyone in the province who wants to learn more and access more information just about public genetic testing in general. And for people who are looking for more information in general, like beyond what we can offer, and are concerned about, say, hereditary cancer mutations other than BRCA, because it's not the only hereditary cancer mutation out there, I definitely recommend also the American website FORCE, which stands for Facing Our Risk Empowered. They have a wealth of resources on every topic that relates to this issue. And while the information won't be BC specific, it can at least fill some gaps that we don't have covered yet here. So those are some of the best resources I think that are out there at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing those. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It was lovely to have you.
Thanks for joining us on the GOSH podcast. To learn more about the Gynecologic Cancer Initiative and our podcast, make sure to check out our website at gynecancerinitiative.ca.